The barbecue had barely started when the reign of the neighborhood's self-appointed tyrant came crashing down. Curious why? Let me explain. I had just flipped a rib on the grill when the sound of tires skidding across gravel shattered the calm. Karina, the infamous HOA president, stormed onto my property like I just launched a missile. "Stop this right now. This is community land, you're trespassing," she bellowed, like she was about to call in air support. "But the thing I said, this land, the pond, every blade of grass, all mine, and I had the legal paperwork to prove it." Instead of reading the room or the documents, she did what Karen does best. She called the cops. Not one, but two patrol cars showed up just under 10 minutes later. It took me less than a minute to flip the narrative. What happened next? Let's just say the HOA never saw it coming. Karen's fixation on my grill being a few feet over some imaginary line ended up unraveling something huge: a tangled web of forged property lines, millions in misallocated funds, and 17 neighborhoods unknowingly dragged into it. If you're watching this, Karina, yes, you would just know I'm currently sitting in a courtroom as you point at me, wailing that a barbecue ruined your life. It had been 3 months since Dad passed. The silence across Sullivan Ranch still didn't feel right. The 40-acre spread felt twice as big without his voice bouncing across the fields or his awful dad jokes drifting from the workshop. He left me this piece of heaven in Willowbrook County, a jewel of a place with a spring-fed pond that shimmered like glass under the Texas sun. Dad always said this land was built with our family's blood, sweat, and tears. I just wanted to honor him with something, simply just a quiet cookout by the pond like we used to do every Sunday after church. The scent of mesquite smoke and sizzling meat always brought me back to the good days, when life felt easier, when he was still here, talking about everything from spark plugs to heartbreak. I had just finished rubbing his signature garlic pepper blend onto a ribeye, his secret recipe, when I heard tires crunch again. Not a pickup or a neighbor's car, no. This was something expensive. A sleek black Mercedes rolled up to my property line and out stepped a man who looked like he'd evict a puppy shelter if it meant meeting a quarterly goal. Marcus Webb, 6'2" in a suit so sharp it probably had its own legal team. He walked like a man who hadn't smiled since the early 2000s, hair slicked back, expression frozen in permanent disapproval. Marcus had all the warmth of a tax audit. "Mr. Sullivan," he said coolly, "I'm Marcus Webb, representing the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. I'm here to speak with you about your recent activity on this property." He glanced at my grill like I was cooking contraband, not steaks. Then came the clipboard, thick with ominous documents, fluttering like bureaucratic autumn leaves in the breeze. "According to Section 4.7.2 of our guidelines," he began, "all outdoor cooking must receive prior approval from the Architectural Committee, a minimum of 72 hours in advance. Furthermore, any structure as a temporary or otherwise within 50 feet of communal water features require an environmental impact study and written consent from the board." I stared at him like he just told me the moon was a government installation and Dairy Queen was run by aliens. "Hold up, partner," I said, wiping my hands on a dish towel older than some home members. "This is my land, bought, paid for, and deeded in my family's name since my great-granddad staked a claim in 1952. I headed to my truck and retrieved the worn leather folder from the glove box, the same one Dad used to show me when teaching me the ropes. Inside, the original deed, yellowed by time, but crystal clear about every inch I owned. "See this?" I pointed. "That oak tree over there to the creek beyond those hills? That's all Sullivan land, always has been. Your HOA's got as much authority here as a goldfish trying to run NASA." Marcus flipped through the papers like they were instruction manuals for joy. He didn't even blink, just snapped pictures with his phone and probably uploaded them to some cold, digital graveyard for people who hate campfires and fun. "Mr. Sullivan," he replied, in that same lifeless tone, "I appreciate you sharing these documents. I will, of course, need to verify their legitimacy through our legal channels. That said, community guidelines and private ownership often intersect in complicated ways." He closed his clipboard like it was a tomb and straightened his tie like he was about to declare war. "I suggest reviewing the current regulations. Activities like yours could affect property value, a broken bar, and neighborhood harmony." With that, he turned and walked back to his Mercedes like a robot running low on empathy. but something about his tone chilled me more than the August heat ever could. "We'll be in touch." He's not like a promise, but a warning, like he already had the next play lined up, and I didn't even know I was on the board. Dad always said to trust your gut, and right then, my gut told me Marcus Webb wasn't going away, and neither was whatever scheme he was quietly nursing. The way he looked at my land like it was already last made my skin crawl more than waking up with a spider in your morning coffee. I turned back to my grill, trying to reclaim the peace from earlier, but it was gone, like trying to enjoy a campfire after someone says the world ends tomorrow. Sure, the ribeye was still perfectly seasoned, the pond still glistened like a necklace laid across the earth, and Dad's laughter still echoed in the back of my mind. But now there was something new in the air besides the smoke and the heat. Trouble. And it was just getting started. Everything changed in that moment, as Marcus's taillights faded into the distance down the county road. I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that this wasn't just about grills or property line, as something bigger was brewing. Just before disappearing completely, Marcus stopped at the end of the drive, rolled down his window, and turned back toward me with a grin so cold it made undertakers look cheerful. "Mr. Sullivan," he called out, his voice stretching across the space like a final warning bell, "I'd highly recommend you read the HOA guidelines thoroughly. There are certain details you might not fully grasp yet." It didn't sound like friendly advice. It sounded like a threat polished in legal jargon and tied up in a $1,000 tie. And deep down, I knew Marcus wasn't bluffing. He knew something I didn't, and whatever it was about to turn my quiet cookout into the opening volley of a war one never asked to fight. 2 days later, I was back at the pond, ribeye in hand, stubbornly determined to enjoy my land. The morning sun reflected off the water in gold streaks, and for a brief, blissful moment, I almost forgot about Marcus Webb and his veiled threats. That peace lasted exactly 14 minutes, just enough time for Karen Foster to assemble her personal army of badge-wearing enforcers. I heard her before I saw her, an unmistakable shriek slicing through the morning stillness like nails on a chalkboard. "There he is! That's him!" she screamed, her voice turning the air sour. What followed looked like the intro scene to a trashy reality TV show. Karen Foster strutted forward like a cross between a hyperactive peacock and a real estate agent on commission overload. About 5'6" in heels that could double as self-defense weapons, she wore a powder blue blazer that practically yelled, "I demand to speak to your manager from orbit." Her blonde hair was sculpted into a helmet made of hairspray and poor choices. She moved with the confidence of someone who thought bylaws were sacred texts. Behind her were two very reluctant-looking police officers. Officer Martinez had the defeated expression of a man who'd been through Karen's theatrics more than once, while Officer Rodriguez kept glancing around like he expected to see a camera crew leap out and yell, "Gotcha!" "Oh, thank God you're here," Karen declared, clutching her designer bag like it held national secrets. "This man has repeatedly trespassed on our community land despite multiple warnings. He's running some sort of illegal cooking setup right next to our protected wetlands. Dozens of violations. Environmental harm. Noise complaints." She pointed to my modest grill setup like I was operating a covert missile silo. "I've documented everything," she continued. "Photos, legal consultations. This is a textbook case of willful property damage and community endangerment. He needs to be dealt with immediately." Officer Martinez stepped forward with a sigh, already flipping open his notepad. He looked like he'd rather be redirecting traffic in a lightning storm. "Sir, we've received a complaint about unauthorized use of community property. I'm going to need to see some ID and get an explanation of what you're doing here." From his tone, I could tell he'd already drawn his conclusions and they weren't in my favor. Karen had likely spun her tale enough times to have it etched into local law enforcement protocol. No one asked to see any property records, no questions about who actually owned what, just assumptions and accusations. "Of course, officer," I said calmly, pulling out my ID and the same worn deed I'd shown Marcus Webb days earlier. "I'm Maverick Sullivan, and this land, it's been in my family since 1952, long before anyone even uttered the phrase HOA around here." Officer Rodriguez leaned in to inspect the document, His eyebrows rose slightly as he read the detailed legal boundaries. He looked out toward the land and nodded slowly. "According to this," he said, "Mr. Sullivan owns everything from that oak tree down to the creek, including the pond and approximately 40 surrounding acres." Martinez barely glanced at it. His mind was clearly still spinning in Karen's orbit, where declarations carried more weight than deeds. Then came the moment that felt like karma finally clocked in for a shift. Rodriguez pulled out a GPS unit and began pacing the area, cross-checking coordinates with the deed's boundary descriptions. Karen stood stiffly nearby, her fingers tightening around her purse as the minutes dragged. Finally, Rodriguez turned to her, his tone shifting from curious to matter-of-fact. "Ma'am," he said, "based on these readings, you're standing about 15 feet inside Mr. Sullivan's private property. Community land doesn't begin until over 30 past that fence line." He pointed to a clearly marked boundary fence one Karen had either ignored or willfully stepped past. Karen's face morphed in rapid sequence: pink confidence, ghost white shock, and then bright crimson embarrassment. It was like watching a mood ring tossed in a dryer. "That's a broken bar. That's not possible," she stammered, her grip on control slipping. "Our surveyor confirmed the boundary extends to the water's edge." He's forging documents to confuse the situation and avoid consequences for his illegal setup. But Rodriguez was already snapping photos of the fence, the deed, and Karen herself is still very much on land that wasn't hers. He was building a case so airtight even a magician couldn't wriggle out of it. "Ma'am," he said patiently, like explaining gravity to a flat earther, "I'm going to need you to step back onto public property." Then he turned to me. "And Mr. Sullivan, you're well within your rights. Your right to continue barbecuing on your own property," Officer Rodriguez concluded. Officer Martinez, however, looked like someone had just told him his favorite team got relocated to a different galaxy. The unshakable confidence he had in Karen melted faster than an ice cube on a Texas driveway. In the blink of an eye, the narrative shifted from Karen the noble crusader to Karen the trespassing drama queen who'd wasted police time with false alarms and self-righteous flair. As the officers turned to leave, Mrs. Thompson, my elderly neighbor from next door, slowly made her way over. The kind of woman who walked like she'd seen more nonsense than most people could dream up, probably pushing 80. Her white hair framed a face that wore a smile seasoned with decades of watching foolish people embarrass themselves. She leaned in, speaking just loud enough for Karen and the rest of the block to hear. "Sweetheart," she said with a knowing whisper, "Karen's got friends down at the station if you catch my drift. Her cousin's on dispatch, and her bridge partner's married to a sergeant. Don't expect this to be the last time she pulls strings." The ice-cold look she sent in Karen's direction could have turned boiling water to frost. Karen clearly got the message, yet her pale expression confirmed it. By the time the squad cars rolled off, Karen stood planted firmly on the correct side of the property line. Her swagger was gone, her authority dismantled in front of half the neighborhood, most of whom would probably be gossiping about this incident for months. But instead of retreating with an ounce of dignity like any normal person would, Karen whipped out her phone and started snapping photos of my grill, my truck, even the pond. She wasn't documenting defeat, she was assembling a case. That sly little smile on her face, that was a strategist's smirk, and not someone who lost, but someone recalculating for round 2. And in that moment, I realized Karen Foster wasn't going to walk away. She wasn't the type to accept being wrong, especially not in public. Whatever she was planning next, it wasn't going to be as simple as calling the cops. That night, I couldn't sleep. The encounter with Karina and Martinez's judgmental stare played on repeat in my head like a stuck song. I'd been treated like a criminal for grilling on land my family had owned for generations. By 3 a.m., I gave up trying to rest. I slipped outside and wandered down to the pond where Dad and I used to sit when life got hard. The moonlight painted the water in silver, and for a second, I almost heard his voice again, reminding me that every challenge was just a puzzle waiting for the right solution. Sitting on the old dock Dad built with his own hands, I felt smaller than I had in months. The weight of fighting this alone hit me like a lead blanket. For the first time, I actually thought about giving up hassling. moving somewhere without hose and vultures in business suits hovering overhead. Dad had always been the fighter, the man who stared down anyone who tried to take what was ours, and without him, I felt like David without a slingshot, facing off against Goliath and his legal team. By morning, I needed answers. Real ones. I dug into Dad's homophresia, the one I hadn't touched since the funeral. True to his nature, everything was arranged like a military operation. Labels on every folder, his own organizational logic embedded into every drawer. I started with the property records, hoping for anything that might explain why Marcus Webb and Karen Foster seemed so damn sure they had a claim to my land. That's when I found it. Tucked behind some surveying gear, hidden like a secret, was Dad's leather-bound journal. His handwritten entries stretched back 2 years, and what I read chilled me to my core. March 15th, they're back. Same black sedan. Same guy with the clipboard. Taking photos of the pond again. Margaret Thompson said they've been asking neighbors questions about land values and future development. Something's not right. Entry after entry painted a picture of growing paranoia, except it wasn't paranoia. It was a warning. Dad had been seeing things clearly. Mysterious visitors, quiet conversations, unmarked vehicles. He'd noticed them months before anyone else, but the entry that hit me like a punch to the chest was written 6 months before he passed. Caught them surveying near the creek today. I had no permission. Guy said he worked for the county, but the gear wasn't county issued. Said they were updating community boundaries. Karen's been acting strange too, asking specific questions about the property. I'm documenting everything. I don't think this is just a misunderstanding. My hands shook as I flipped to the last entries. They'd been written only weeks before the heart attack. They're getting bolder now. They were on my land today. I surveying. Karen showed up with some slick corporate type in a suit. He looked at the property like it was already sold. They didn't see me watching from the workshop, but I heard enough. They're planning something in acquisition, development, and it's not just about our 40 acres. If anything happens to me, Maverick needs to know what he's up against. I stared at those words for what felt like hours. My father had seen this coming. He'd tried to warn me, warn anyone who would listen. He hadn't just been preparing for a legal scuffle, he'd been building a case. With renewed purpose, I dove back into his filing cabinets, combing through every label. Tucked inside a folder marked equipment and maintenance, I found what I'd been looking for: dozens of photos, strangers on our land with measuring tools, Karen shaking hands with men in tailored suits, surveying equipment placed without permission, hard evidence of everything Dad feared. That's when the knock came at my front door. Duke Morrison, Dad's best friend for over 2 decades, a retired insurance investigator who'd moved out here to enjoy the peace and quiet of country living. Only now, his weathered face carried concern and something heavier. Guilt. Son, he said, easing into Dad's favorite chair, I've been meaning to talk to you since that mess with the police. Your father and we suspected something was happening with that HOA crew, but we didn't know how deep it went. Not until it was almost too late. He paused, then dropped the bombshell. Your dad wasn't just collecting evidence for himself. He was trying to expose a much bigger game. We believe there's a coordinated effort, a plan to pressure landowners into selling cheap, using the HOA as the spearhead. We've seen this happen before, in other towns, other counties, developers weaponizing regulations and paperwork to push people off their land. Families had been pushed off land they'd held for generations, Duke explained, his voice carrying the weight of too many bitter memories. Your dad was close to exposing it all, he added, but he passed before we could pull the last threads together. As Duke outlined the scheme, corporate muscle dressed up as HOA compliance, something inside me shifted. The fog of grief and confusion that had settled over me since the funeral hardened into resolve. This wasn't about burger smoke anymore. It was about defending 3 generations of Sullivan sweat and soil from scavengers in tailored suits. Duke rose to leave, expression grave. Listen, Sona, Karen Foster and her corporate buddies are guarding secrets tighter than Fort Knox. If you're serious about fighting back, you'll need allies. Evidence: a broken bar and a bulldog of a lawyer. Start with your father's safe. He left you more than deeds, he left the tools to win. If you've got the guts to use them. While I was still processing that bombshell, Karen launched a counter-strike with all the subtlety of a marching band. Her Facebook post went local viral in hours. featuring carefully cropped photos that made my humble grill look like a toxic waste incinerator. Concerned citizens of Willowbrook. Her post blared, "We have a dangerous resident ignoring community standards, threatening safety, tanking property value as a broken bar." She spun half-truths into a masterpiece of manipulation. According to Karen, I'd menaced police, flouted every rule in sight, and was practically pouring mercury into the pond. The comments lit up. #Willowbrook safety trended, complete with tales of plummeting home prices and endangered rose gardens. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in 15 years suddenly became experts on wetlands and air quality. The next morning, proof of just how deep the rabbit hole went rang my doorbell. Marcus Webb was back at this time, flanked by a sharply dressed woman who introduced herself as Jessica Macron Martinez from Pinnacle Properties Development Corporation. The predatory gleam in her eye put my nerves on edge. "Mr. Macron Sullivan," she cooed, all velvet and steel, "we hear you're having some broken bar integration issues. We'd like to offer a solution beneficial to everyone." That solution was a buyout so insultingly low it could have been a joke. Only a third of current market value for 40 acres of prime Texas land, including water and mineral rights. Marcus pitched it like a used car flash sale. "Limited-time offer," he urged. Given the growing tensions and possible legal complications, quick resolution helps everybody. I politely declined. Jessica's smile vanished faster than dew in July. Out came a thick folder of preliminary findings of fancy seals, heavy legal phrases, and plenty of implied doom. "Pinnacle has been asked to review local code compliance," she said coolly. "Early results show serious issues with your land use practices." The whole presentation reeked of rehearsal. Marcus kept checking his phone. Jessica's confidence had an off-key quaver, and the paperwork felt stagey, a prop thin. Just then, my phone buzzed. A message from Sophia Chen, profile picture of a young attorney outside a courthouse. "Mr. Macron Sullivan, I've seen the posts about your situation. I specialize in HOA abuse cases, and the pattern here is familiar. May we speak?" Her note felt like a lifeline. I excused myself, stepped aside, and took the call. Sophia's voice was steady as someone who'd been down this road and come out the other side. "Mr. Macron Sullivan," she said, "Pinnacle Properties shows up whenever developers want land on the cheap. They stir up code complaints, bury owners in legal threats, and pressure them to sell. It's not just unethical, it's illegal, and I believe we can prove it." "We can prove it, Mr. Macron Sullivan, and once we do, their whole plan collapses." During our call, Sophia explained she'd been tracking Pinnacle Properties across 3 counties, documenting how they weaponized HOA rules and trumpeted up community disputes to force owners into queue-to-rate sales. Their targets always shared 3 things: water access, mineral rights, or prime development potential. "What makes your case stand out," she said, "is the synchronized social media smear and the timing of their lowball offer." I stepped back onto the porch to find Marcus and Jessica locked in a hushed, urgent argument that snapped shut the moment they noticed me. "Mr. Macron Sullivan," Jessica chirped, smile sliding back into place, "please take time to weigh our offer. Fighting City Hallowell, the HOA can cost more in legal fees and stress than most folks realize. A quick, amicable sale spares everyone the trouble." As their black sedan rolled away, I noticed they weren't heading to town. They crawled past neighboring parcels, as if scouting their next marks. The whole visit felt like a scene from a gangster flick, only the Tommy guns had been swapped for legalese and fake cordiality. Sophia's parting words sent a chill through me. "Once we push back, they'll escalate. People who spend this much money and effort don't just shrug and walk away. Expect a last-ditch attempt to scare you off tonight. Tomorrow, we start building the case." True to her word, Sophia showed up the next morning in a no-nonsense Honda and a badly scarred briefcase. Mid-20s, maybe, but her handshake was steely and her gaze razor-sharp. "What I'm about to reveal," she said, spreading papers across my kitchen table, "will make the barbecue fiasco look like a fender bender." First came a county map dotted with 17 red circles, each stamped with dates and dollar figures that made my stomach flip. "Pinnacle has been running the same scam for 3 years," she said. "Step 1, slip allies into the HOA board. Step 2, Manufacture code violations. Step 3. Squeeze owners into panic sales, then flip the land for massive profit. A leaked Pinnacle memo labeled Project Willowbrook Resort Complex detailed their endgame: transform the entire region into a luxury playground to golf courses, hotels, high-end retail. 5+ years of covert land grabs through shell companies had set the stage for an estimated $500 million in annual revenue. Sophia tapped the map again. Your parcel is the keystone. It holds the main water source and the mineral rights for expansion. Without it, the resort collapses. Dad's death, it seemed, merely fast-tracked their timeline. They'd banked on me folding faster than a seasoned surveyor who smelled a rat. But the part that truly lit my fuse was the toll. 127 families forced out in 3 years, so many after relentless HOA fines, code citations, and smear campaigns that made Karen's Facebook post look quaint. Lifetimes of memories flattened for upscale condos and corporate bonuses. Right then came a knock. Mrs. Macron Rodriguez, Officer Macron Rodriguez's mother, stood on the porch, equal parts nervous and resolute. I've been hearing Karen Foster's patio calls, she confessed, cheeks flushing. Our yards share a fence, and her voice carries. At first it was just annoying gossip, then I realized it was serious. She leaned closer, almost whispering. Last week she told someone, a phase 3 is ready. Once Sullivan folds, everything falls into place. Eventually, they all fold once the pressure ramps up and the legal bills start piling high. Mrs. Rodriguez's phone recording wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. Karen's voice was unmistakable, casually discussing accelerated timelines and orchestrated pressure tactics with someone who kept referencing investor deliverables and quarterly returns. What the recording revealed made my stomach turn. Karen Foster wasn't just a self-important HOA president with a personal vendetta. She was on Pinnacle Properties' payroll, receiving nearly $10,000 a month to act as their inside agent. That kind of money explained her relentless obsession with trivial violations and her dramatic crusades over barbecue smoke. Sophia lit up like a prosecutor on verdict day. "There's a broken bar, this is the smoking gun," she said, already mentally drafting the first wave of injunctions and legal motions like a general mapping out her attack strategy. As we spread documents and recordings across the kitchen table, it hit me this wasn't about a grill anymore. It was about standing up for entire neighborhoods that were being quietly gutted by corporate predators posing as HOA enforcers. Families weren't just being harassed, they were being erased. The weight of it all settled onto my shoulders, heavier than anything since Dad's funeral. But it didn't crush me, it solidified something: purpose, resolve, legacy. Sophia packed the evidence back into her briefcase with the calm satisfaction of someone holding a royal flush. Tomorrow, we file injunctions, fraud charges, and conspiracy claims that'll freeze Pinnacle's operations in their tracks. But you need to be ready. Desperate people do desperate things. They'll come at us harder than ever after tonight. And she was right. The next morning, we went public. Sophia had the brilliant idea to live stream the evidence drop from the very spot this whole mess began, right next to the pond Karen once tried to claim as community property. "Nothing says property rights like telling the truth from your own damn land," she'd said, helping me position cameras and set up the mic like a pro. By 10 a.m., we were live. Over 8,000 people tuned in within minutes as word spread like wildfire through Facebook groups, neighborhood forums, and text chains across the county. I introduced myself, told the story of the infamous barbecue incident, then started unveiling the layers of deceit Pinnacle had cloaked in bureaucracy and HOA policies. Sophia walked viewers through the 17 red-circled neighborhoods, the timeline of harassment, and the leaked documents detailing Project Willowbrook Resort. The chat lit up with people recognizing their own streets, their own stories of being pushed out. That's when the storm hit. Karen Foster arrived like she was leading a coup, flanked by a phalanx of suits, including Marcus Webb, 2 unfamiliar men, and someone claiming to be legal counsel for the Willowbrook HOA. But the real showstopper was the thick document Marcus dramatically held aloft. With the flair of a bad stage actor, he boomed into the mic, "Mr. Sullivan, by order of the Travis County District Court, you are hereby instructed to immediately cease all defamatory broadcasts regarding legally operating businesses and HOA entities." The court order looked legit as seals, signatures, and enough jargon to make a judge squint. He claimed our stream violated privacy laws, community regulations, and an agreement I'd never seen, let alone signed. It was theater. All of it, designed to intimidate, confuse, and derail our momentum. And it didn't stop there. Behind the scenes, someone was attacking the stream itself. Viewers started disappearing. The 8,000 dropped to 3,000, then under 500. Reports of spam, community violations, and misinformation flooded in from fake accounts created solely to shut us down. Private groups were now circulating our feed under headlines like "Neighborhood Terrorist Live Streaming Lies and Threat to Property Values Goes Public." For a few minutes, I thought they'd won. Karen stood smugly behind Marcus, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction while their lawyers snapped photos and scribbled notes like they were preparing for trial. The live chat flooded with questions. Is this real? Are they shutting him down? Did he lie? And then like cavalry over the hill, Duke Morrison stepped forward. "Folks, let me properly introduce myself," he said, planting himself in front of the camera with the poise of a seasoned professional. "I'm Duke Morrison, retired insurance fraud investigator with over 3 decades of experience. And for the past 3 years, I've been tracking Pinnacle Properties and their illegal operations." He pulled out a thick folder, and just like that, the tide turned. The folder Duke Morrison pulled out looked like it could dent a car hood. He held it with the confidence of someone who'd testified under oath more times than most people had visited the dentist. His voice cut through the noise like a judge's gavel. "Karen Foster has received exactly $123,000 in payments from Pinnacle Properties over the past 18 months, he said, flipping pages like a seasoned prosecutor. "Marcus Webb is operating under a fraudulent business license, and that a court order he's waiving, printed an hour ago at a Kinko's in downtown Austin." Gasps rippled through the crowd, but Duke wasn't done. Sophia Chen stepped forward like she'd been waiting for her cue in a courtroom drama, holding up her phone for the live stream to see. "I just got off the phone with the Travis County Clerk's office. There is no court order, no media ban, no legal document restricting Mr. Sullivan's right to speak on his own property." Her voice rang clear and confident. "What we do have is a documented pattern of fraud, coercion, and attempted intimidation, and I'll be presenting every shred of it to the district attorney on Monday morning." Everything flipped like a Texas thunderstorm rolling in from nowhere. Neighbors began emerging from driveways, porches, and the edges of the property where they'd been quietly watching. Mrs. Rodriguez was front and center, phone in one hand, a thick notebook in the other. Nearly 24 neighbors joined her, forming a human backdrop behind our camera. Karen's polished legal entourage suddenly looked like outnumbered wedding guests at the wrong reception. The live stream surged a gain of 15,000 viewers and climbing. The chat exploded with cheers, emojis, and stories from viewers who had their own Pinnacle horror tales to tell. This wasn't just a live stream anymore, it was a movement. Karen Foster scanned the crowd like a drowning woman realizing the lifeboats had left without her. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words betrayed her. "This isn't over," she muttered, though her voice cracked under the weight of exposed lies and unraveling schemes. She looked less like a community leader and more like someone who'd just discovered her parachute was actually a backpack full of bricks. Marcus Webb didn't say a word. He was already walking away, his expression grim as he headed for the black sedan, abandoning Karen like a captain bailing from a sinking ship that no longer had a deck. Karen's team followed a hurried, scattered, defeated. I turned to the camera, the microphone still hot, and smiled like a man who'd just reclaimed more than land. "Tomorrow," I said, "we're going to show you exactly how much Karen Foster earned betraying the people she was supposed to represent. I promise you it's going to make you question everything you thought you knew about HOAs and a community service." 6 months later, I found myself in a packed Travis County courtroom, watching Karen Foster sob like an actress who'd missed her final audition. She pointed at me through her tears. "That barbecue ruined my life," she wailed. Even the court reporter had to suppress a smirk. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in that courtroom. The woman who spent months trying to wreck my peace, my home, and my name was now playing the victim in front of a judge who looked like he'd rather be cleaning out gutters than listening to her meltdown. Behind me sat nearly every person who mattered. Duke Morrison, still sharp and steady, with his now famous folder. Sophia Chen, a rising legal star with national attention and a case portfolio growing by the hour, and Mrs. Rodriguez, a calm, collected, gripping the phone that had cracked this case wide open. What started as a backyard disagreement had transformed into a media firestorm. The hashtag #FreeThePond had gone viral, racking up millions of posts across TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram. People across the country were sharing their horror stories, and news outlets from Houston to LA covered the trial as if it were a high-profile scandal. Late-night shows ran bits on Karen vs. The Grill, and I even got podcast invites from hosts who wanted to talk about land rights, corruption, and how one barbecue sparked a revolution. In court, the criminal trial was a masterclass in how truth dismantles lies. District Attorney Sarah Williams presented Duke's surveillance photos, Mrs. Rodriguez's recordings, and Sophia's airtight research. Pinnacle's playbook was exposed, piece by piece, across 3 counties. Karen's defense attorney, a tired, overworked man who looked like he regretted his entire law school education, tried to sell the jury a story about a well-meaning woman swept up in corporate games she didn't understand. But it was too little, too late. Her empire of lies had collapsed, and the ashes smelled like burnt ego and overpriced HOA paperwork. It wasn't Karen Foster's theatrics or excuses that sealed her fate. It was the cold, undeniable truth in her bank records, evidence as damning as concrete boots in a mob movie. The prosecution laid it out with surgical precision: $127,000 in direct payments from Pinnacle Properties, spaced perfectly across 18 months. Each deposit aligned with a sudden wave of code violations, neighbor complaints, and pressure campaigns strategically timed to force families from their homes. Confronted with the evidence, Karen cracked like old plaster. She confessed to orchestrating the harassment campaigns under Marcus Webb's orders, admitting she'd fueled conflict to drive property sales below market value. But the courtroom's sharpest intake of breath came when Sophia Chen stepped forward and handed the judge a full report, a crisp, comprehensive, and devastating. "Your Honor," Sophia said, her voice calm but unshakable, "this conspiracy affected over 300 families across multiple counties. We estimate $85 million in property losses through coercion, manipulation, and outright abuse of HOA power." The judge didn't speak for a long moment. You could practically see the calculations forming behind his eyes. How many years, how many victims, how deep the corruption ran. By then, Marcus Webb had already vanished. Last seen boarding a private flight to the Cayman Islands, his seat barely cold before federal charges were filed. Pinnacle Properties didn't fare much better. They'd declared bankruptcy, their assets frozen by the FBI, and a multi-state investigation was underway. Their CEO, Jonathan Steele, was now the subject of enough federal indictments to keep a team of lawyers rich for years. And Karen? Her sentencing was everything I'd hoped for and more satisfying than a perfect track of ribs on a summer afternoon. Judge Martinez sentenced her to 3 years of probation, ordered her to pay $50,000 in restitution to affected families, and assigned 800 hours of community service focused specifically on environmental restoration and public garden maintenance. But the real poetic justice? She'd be serving those hours at Sullivan Memorial Park, the nature preserve I'd established on my land. In honor of Dad, the legal victory had ripple effects across the entire region. Every one of the 17 neighborhoods targeted by Pinnacle began dissolving their HOAs, replacing them with voluntary associations rooted in cooperation and not control. The 127 displaced families had banded together, filing class action suits to reclaim their homes or recover full market value compensation. And my modest little ranch? It became a kind of sanctuary, a landmark, a symbol of resistance. Every weekend, I hosted what we came to call Freedom Barbecues, gatherings where folks shared meals, told stories, and reminded each other that it was still possible for ordinary people to stand tall against corporate Goliaths. Duke Morrison published a best-selling memoir titled How I Took Down a Multimillion-Dollar Scam with a Camera and a Gut Feeling. Mrs. Rodriguez became something of a local legend, celebrated for her eavesdropping, yes, but more so for her courage in speaking up. And Sophia? She used the case to launch her own law firm, specializing in HOA abuse and property manipulation. Her name was everywhere: interviews, news panels, community forums, always pushing for legislative reforms to protect homeowners. Every time I saw her on screen explaining how to fight back, I felt proud, because it all started with a barbecue and a man just trying to honor his father's legacy. Driving home from court that day, I found myself thinking about Dad. He would have laughed, shaking his head and saying something about how the biggest battles always start with the smallest things. A boundary line, a grill, a pond. Karen Foster had been right about one thing: the barbecue did ruin her life, just not in the way she expected. Now, every Sunday, I still fire up that same grill beside the pond, but instead of grilling for one, I'm usually cooking for 30 or 40 neighbors of friends, really brought together by the fight we never thought we'd win. There's a plaque near the water now, simple, honest. It reads, "This land belongs to the people, not the greedy." And somewhere, not too far from here, Karen Foster is pulling weeds, bagging trash, and learning at long last what real community service looks like. Have you ever had to choose between silence and standing up to someone more powerful? Share your story in the comments. You never know who it might inspire. If this moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to Ya Stories for more real stories of courage, justice, and everyday people making a difference.